Hey guys, welcome back to the Pulling Curls podcast. Today on episode 123, I'm bringing on my favorite physical therapist to talk about if we should pee in the shower and kind of more in relation to that. It's not just about peeing in the shower, but let's untangle it. Hi, I'm Hillary Erickson, the curly head behind the Pulling Curls podcast, where we untangle pregnancy, parenting, home, and even travel. We know there's no right answer for every family, but hopefully we can spark some ideas that will work for yours. Life's tangled, just like my hair. Okay, guys, I bring up the sensitive topics that everyone wants to talk about. And when I do that, I demand reviews. So go ahead and jump on over while you're listening and leave me a review on Apple Podcasts. It really means a lot. And it's going to help other people get valuable podcast information like peeing in the shower. Okay, this is my guest's third time on the Pulling Curls podcast. She has done another one about urinary incontinence. We've done one about symphysis pubis dysfunction. And today we're talking about bladder triggers, peeing in the shower. I want to introduce today's physical therapist of the day, Ashlie Crewe. Are you overwhelmed by all there is to do around your house? As a new mom, I felt overwhelmed at every turn. Fortunately, I turned to systems to make a change. Whether it's mornings, dinner time, or even just to climb out of a pile of kids' clothes, my course Family Routines can save you. I hold your hand as we smooth out these rough patches, making every day easier so we can more easily handle when your preschooler tells you they can use their urine like a lightsaber. Parenting is always going to be a wild ride. Routines are just your seatbelt, and they can support you. Use coupon code UNTANGLED to save 15% at checkout. Link in the show notes. Hey, Ashlie, welcome to the Pulling Curls podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on again.
Yeah, this is time number 3 for Ashlie.
Yes, I'm going to be a frequent flyer.
I think this isn't my area of expertise. We talk about bleeding. I'll be all over it.
Right, great, because I'm not.
Well, only bleeding from one area, because if my kids say they're bleeding on their finger, I'm like, that's not my area.
Yeah, I tell my children to rub some dirt on that, so I feel like you're probably more qualified than me. So.
Okay, so today I was on TikTok, and of course I saw somebody like, do not pee while you're in the shower, and then suddenly, and I was like, ooh, because every time I turn on the shower, I feel like I need to pee. Yes. And then of course somehow I hit it somehow, and then could never get that TikTok video to come back. So I was like, Ashlie, are you not supposed to be in the shower? Because it was a physical therapist. It wasn't just like
some random person,
random doula saying don't pee in the shower.
Right.
So is it okay to pee in the shower? Is it okay to pee when you turn the shower on? Tell me more.
The short answer is it depends. So one of the things that we know about how the bladder works is so much about how the bladder works is reflexes. So it's happening in your spinal cord without us really thinking about it. But because we can't always be in super control of some of those reflexes, we want to be very cautious about what we're training our body to associate. And so everybody who's ever talked about this kind of triggers, when it comes to the bladder, we talk about the Pavlov's dogs experiment. And I feel like everyone knows it, but in case you didn't, Pavlov was a researcher. He fed his dogs and rang a bell every time he fed his dogs, and he measured their saliva output, which is a job I don't want. But eventually after repeated exposure to food plus bell, he could take away the food element, just ring the bell, and the dogs would start to salivate. That's Pavlov's dogs experiment.
I have Pavlov's bladder.
Right? We can name it that condition, Pavlov's bladder. And so like we as human beings, we have all of these, ingrained things that are Pavlovian trained in us. So I tell like medical professionals who work in hospital settings, you hear a code blue and immediately your nervous system kicks on and says, I gotta run, I gotta do this, because that's what we do. In the same way, if we train our body, so if we repeatedly hear water running, and you think about, if we sit or stand and we urinate and we hear that sound of urine going into the toilet, it sounds pretty similar to water running. And so if we continue to associate that with then not just peeing, but also running water in the sink, because, I run the water in the sink and now it's a similar sound, so I'm going to empty my bladder, or I'm going to turn my shower on and it's a similar sound, so now I'm going to empty my bladder. We're training those reflexes to respond to all running water instead of just the sound of pee going into the toilet. And so, I mean, I'm very gracious in my job, where I say it's not bad, but it's just, we don't necessarily want you to be watching TV and watching some sink commercial and thinking like, oh my God, I have to go to the bathroom because my bladder is like contracting, going crazy. And so that's one of the theories on why it's not a great idea. The other thing is, and I kind of joke because some people say like, you're not supposed to pee standing up, but about 49% of the population historically stands to pee. And so it's important that we talk about how to stand to pee if you want to stand to pee. And so this is things I never thought I'd be talking about in my profession, but here we are. And so because the biggest thing is, if we stand with sort of a perfect posture to urinate, our pelvic floor muscles have to be a little bit active to stabilize everything and to hold us up. If our pelvic floor is completely relaxed, we would probably fall down. And so the problem with that is that for all these lovely reflexes to work, the pelvic floor muscles are supposed to fully relax so that the bladder can contract and empty. When we're contracting our pelvic floor muscles, it actually gives our bladder the signal to not contract and not empty. So you have to figure out how to stand and not contract your pelvic floor muscles and not fall down. So there's a couple things here. So typically, I would say a lot of people who have penises, they tend to stand and kind of like arch their back a little bit and maybe lock their knees a little bit when they pee. I've done extensive research on my husband and my 2 small children. And the reason that a lot of folks do this, we think as medical professionals, is that in doing that, they kind of stack all of their bones on top of each other so that they can relax their pelvic floor muscles effectively and give their bladder that signal to contract. So if you are standing with perfect posture and your pelvic floor muscles are contracting, your bladder doesn't get that same signal. So it could create some dysfunction. So I say it's important to talk about, if you're going to pee in the shower, we don't want to give you a Pavlov's bladder, but also we want to make sure that you're standing with appropriate mechanics in order to pee effectively. And so the other way, I said, if you've got to pee in the shower, pee in the shower. Like if it's, if you got to do it, you got to do it. But then I also tell people, if you get into a really deep squat, I'm not talking like a squat like we're doing like power squats. I mean, butt almost to the floor so that your leg muscles aren't doing the work. So if you're in a shower that has like a handlebar somewhere, I tell people hold onto that handle and hang down in that squat so that your arms are holding you up. And that's a good way to let your pelvic floor muscles relax and open so that you're giving those the appropriate signals as far as should they be contracting, should they be relaxing, what's going on with the bladder, and all of those things. So that's my official recommendation. Is you're going to pee in the shower, either stand and like arch your back a little bit, maybe lock your knees to try to relax your pelvic floor, or hold on to something and hang down into a deep squat to let your pelvic floor muscles relax. There you have it.
There you have it. Okay. So, but I noticed my bladder has all these triggers. Mm-hmm. Like as soon as I'm going to go to the bathroom, now I have to go to like 2 seconds ago, I was 100% fine. But when I'm like, okay, I'm going to go, and now I have to go so bad. Mm-hmm. It is. So is there anything we can be doing if that's our problem? Because I don't think I can jump on a trampoline. I can do jumping jacks, but if I'm doing jumping jacks and then decide I'm going to use the restroom, then it's all over.
Right. As soon as you make that decision in your brain to say, oh, I'm going to go to the bathroom, then your bladder's like, okay, we're going to the bathroom. And so many people talk about, we call it key in the door kind of, bladder urgency, where, they pull into their driveway. And then all of a sudden their bladder says, here we go. And so a lot of that is because of these trained responses, is that, for some reason, if you have, if your bladder knows, as if your bladder has, cognitive functions.
I feel like my bladder knows and I should name it. Like.
Right. If you historically, as soon as you get into your garage, you walk right into your house and go to the bathroom every time, your bladder starts to form that association. If you, every time you walk into your house or every time you walk into the grocery store, whatever it is, if, your brain and your bladder start to associate those things together, then your brain and your bladder start to anticipate that. And so then if you're pulling into your driveway, pulling into your garage, whatever you've got, your bladder is already starting to see all these signals to say, okay, bathroom's coming, get ready, and starts to do some contractions because it just knows that it's almost time to do that. And the problem is, we've got lots of problems here to unpack, but one of the biggest problems is that it's so hardwired into our system. Again, we're talking reflexes. We're talking about what I call the caveman nervous system, the caveman brain, right? And so I kind of joke and say, if you're a caveman, right, and you're sitting in your cave, cave and a saber-toothed tiger comes to the door of your cave, the opening, no door, of your cave, and you've got a full bladder, like it's time, you've got to make a couple of choices here. And a lot of people's bladders just say fully contract, pee your pants, pee your loincloth, and get away or fight, right? And so a lot of times when people have a little bit of anxiety about like, oh, am I going to make it in time? Or, oh, I have to put all these things down or whatever. I mean, it's not a saber-toothed tiger in most situations in 2021. But if it's, oh, my phone is also ringing or I've got armfuls full of bags.
Or kids, calling kids in.
Exactly. I've got to finagle my 2-year-old out of that the child seat, while they're fussing, right? Your bladder is just like, saber-toothed tiger, just contract and get it over with. And so that becomes a big problem. One of the things that I encourage folks to do, if it is something like that, if you can change the stimulus. So if somebody's saying, I walk into my front door and I put the key in my front door, and then my bladder contracts. I say, can you try to walk to your back door just to see what would happen? Because it's a different stimulus. Your brain doesn't have that association. And it's a good way to help break that. So that's where my patients and I can be super creative about how we can change all the different stimuli. Obviously, if you got to get a shower, you got to get a shower. Hard to change that stimulus. But the other thing that's really important to do is if you've got that significant urgency because you are exposed to a trigger, then one of the most important things you can do is sort of stop moving, first of all, because as we rush and we jostle things around, that just feeds into that contraction of the bladder. And so I tell people, stop moving. If you can sit down, if you're in a situation where you can sit, that would be ideal. Take a couple of deep breaths would be great. Because we want to give that caveman nervous system, caveman brain a chance to just calm down and say, there is no saber-toothed tiger here.
Yeah.
So that's important too. And then I tell people, try like 5 pelvic floor contractions, squeezing as hard as you can. Because again, we're talking these reflexes, and the way we're hardwired is if the pelvic floor is contracting, it should shut down the bladder contraction.
Okay.
So the way normal urination works is we decide to pee and we release tension on our pelvic floor muscles. And then those muscles work in opposite of the bladder. So release the pelvic floor makes the bladder contract. And so the opposite is also true. If we contract the pelvic floor, it tells the bladder to shut up. You're not actually need to go just yet. Like hang in there. And then the bladder continues to stretch and fill with urine. So if you squeeze those pelvic floor muscles a couple of times, it tells that bladder, hey, shut up. I'm in my car. I am, I've got 17 bags from the grocery store in my hands and a toddler in the other, like it's not time. And then I tell folks, once you feel like that severe urgency has decreased, then it's an appropriate time to start walking calmly to the bathroom to then go ahead and make that decision to go to the bathroom. And that's usually how it starts. And then I usually tell folks, as you get better and stronger and more coordinated, you'll be able to get longer gaps of time in between that. Like I'm going to do my contractions and then I'm going to walk to the bathroom. I tell folks, it would be great to do something distracting as well. So that's the other big cool thing is that if we're really involved, and I feel like every person has done this, right? If we're doing something and we're like, oh, I got to pee, right? And then something happens, phone call, or I get wrapped up into TikToks or, whatever, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's 20 minutes later and I still haven't peed. And that's the way our body is designed to work. So I tell folks, I want you to have potentially something to go to that, is going to suck you in a little bit and get you distracted. And so it can be simple things like doing your, 7 times tables, or counting backwards from 57 by threes, like something just to keep your brain occupied, and using that part of your brain. Again, if we're running from a saber-toothed tiger, we are not trying to count backwards by threes from 57. Like that's not the way we're wired. And so it tells our nervous system, well, I must be safe, because the only time I have to do that kind of critical thinking is when I'm relatively assured that there is safety. And so it can really help shut down some of that urgency to empty your bladder as well. So in summary, then we want to stop moving, a couple deep breaths, maybe some pelvic floor contractions, just kind of squeeze, release a couple of times, then something distracting. If you've got a book on your phone, read. If you, like I said, TikToks, the TikToks are only going to be a minute. So one TikTok, you have a minute at most. And then when your urgency has subsided some, then get to the toilet to empty. Those are the big takeaways there.
Okay. So it's kind of like a toddler that you don't want to give in every time it whines, right?
Yes.
Because then you're just showing it every time you whine, I'm going to run like crazy.
Exactly.
To go pee.
So you have a toddler Pavlov bladder.
A toddler Pavlov.
Yes, exactly.
So interesting. Okay, how common is this? Is it very common? Because I would look up the different kinds of like bladder and I'd be like, well, mine is just when I decide like my brain is way too tied to this bladder.
Mm-hmm. So super, super, super common. And I would say if we asked enough questions, we would find that everyone has some sort of trigger. And it's perfectly okay if we have a little bit of a trigger to say like, ooh, this makes me kind of pee, or makes me kind of want to pee, experience some urgency. I think everyone's got that. Lots of people, if they go out in cold weather, they're like, ooh, I got to pee, or, running water, or somebody was saying even just seeing a waterfall, it makes them want to go to the bathroom. So urgency is super common. I mean, we all have the urge to go to the bathroom, but urgency with some triggers is pretty common. Urgency with incontinence, also super common, but that's when we really start to get to the abnormal side of things.
Okay.
So that urge from your bladder should be a signal that like, hey, at some point I'm feeling kind of like I have to go, but it should not be an immediate cease and desist everything you're doing and get to a toilet, or too late, like we've gone. It should be more of a gentle, like, sometime soon I'd like to get to a toilet, as opposed to a demand to urinate right now. But I mean, so super common to experience these symptoms, but definitely something that we could be doing something about.
Okay. So helpful. And again, guys, be honest when you talk with your doctor about these kind of things, because maybe somebody could have told me about this 700 years ago.
Right.
I mean, I've worked with probably 5 urinary incontinence companies in my blogging lifetime. And no one has mentioned, it's always like the jumping jacks,
right,
or other things.
Right.
And I was always like, no, that's not me. That's not me.
Not you. Right.
But if I turn on my shower, it's over.
Right. It's game over. And I think probably that, so what you're talking about is stress incontinence, when there's a stress to the system,
right,
like a physical stressor, like the jumping, sneezing, coughing. Super, super, super common. And I think becoming really normalized a little bit in mainstream media, or I'll say destigmatized, which is great. I'd like it to not be normalized. But I think so many of my patients come to me and say, well, I just always had a small bladder. And I'm like, no, you probably haven't. Like, the statistical likelihood that you actually have an anatomically small bladder is really low versus how many patients have told me, I just have a small bladder. I'm like, you don't have a small bladder. You have a bladder that you have trained to not stretch because you've given into that Pavlovian toddler all the time. And so, but the other flip side of this is that appreciate that the rehabilitation for this is not necessarily super fun, right? Like, we've got to be honest about that.
Right.
And some patients are just like, I can't do that. Where I'm sitting here saying, experience that discomfort for a second. Let's give you some coping strategies. And like, we're going to gradually say like, I need you to wait 2 minutes before you can pee. And then now you can do that successfully. Great. Now I need you to wait 5 minutes. And then you can, like, nobody wants to sit in discomfort for 5 minutes.
That's where TikTok comes in.
Right. Exactly. That's what I always say. Like, God bless TikTok. Cause I'm like, just scroll through a couple videos on TikTok, look at some viral stuff. It doesn't matter. But yes, I think things like that are so, so helpful. So, but I think, the more we do that, the better our symptoms get. And so it is fixable. It's just, not necessarily the funnest thing to rehabilitate from a patient, because I'm saying, yes, you're going to feel that urgency and I need you to deal with it.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you tools, but I need you to deal with it. So
yeah. Okay. Super helpful.
Thanks.
Probably not the podcast everyone's like, oh, I've heard this podcast 600 times. Yeah.
Something new and different.
All right. Thanks for coming on and telling us about our pee parts, Ashlie.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. It was just something that I was like scrolling on TikTok and I was like, that's what I have. Does that ever happen to anybody else? Maybe it's just me. But I think the more we're open about like what exactly is causing our problem, then we can find a fix. Mine's not jumping jacks. It's not jumping on the trampoline like a lot of my friends is. It was this, okay, I'm going to pee. And now I need to pee. It is on fire. My brain is in charge of everything. I wish my brain could be like, I'm going to make $1 million. And then boom, like I make $1 million. I wish it was that tight as like it is with my bladder. Anyone else? Okay, stay tuned for next week's episode. We are talking about important things that can help you stay alive after you have your baby, which is obviously very important. So stay tuned for that one. Thanks so much for joining us on today's episode. We know you have lots of options for your ears, and we are glad that you chose us. We drop episodes weekly, and until next time, we hope you have a tangle-free day.